He thought his heart had dried up with the land until she stumbled into his life, bleeding, broken, and carrying the seed of everything he'd lost. The storm rolled over the hills like a curse he couldn't outrun, soaking the dead fields in his aching bones. Caleb Hart, widowed 5 years, moved like a ghost through the farmhouse, chasing chores for no one. When he heard the scream ragged, distant, swallowed by wind, he almost convinced himself it wasn't real. But something pulled him out into the blackening woods anyway. He found her crumpled near the ravine, her leg twisted, her face pale and scraped with fear. She looked up at him through blood and rain and whispered, "Please, help me." He didn't know it then, but her name was June, and she would rip open his quiet sorrow with the kind of chaos only love brings. 2 weeks later, she would return not limping, but standing tall, with a name on her lips that hadn't been spoken in his house for years. And the moment he heard it, everything, the silence, the grief, the bitterness shattered like old glass. Sometimes, what you bury on a farm doesn't stay buried. Caleb Hart rose with the sun, though there was little reason to. The sky stretched wide and pale above the fields, the kind of hazy morning that promised another dry, fruitless day. His boots thudded against the hardwood floor as he moved through the house in silence, same as he had every morning for the past 5 years. The coffee pot hissed. The dog, a tired border collie named Brisket, didn't bother lifting his head. Outside, the fields of Hartstead Farm waited, cracked and dusty, a poor echo of what they once were. He pulled on his jacket, though the air didn't warrant it, and stepped out to feed the chickens. They clucked without enthusiasm, as if they too had grown weary of the sun and the silence. Caleb remembered when laughter had bounced off the barn walls, when his daughter Lily had chased her mother around the yard, squealing with delight. Sarah's laughter had filled this land, and when she died, it seemed to drain the color from everything. He still hadn't touched her garden. It sat by the fence, overgrown now, stalks dried and leaning, as if bowing under the weight of absence. He told himself he kept it that way for Lily, though she had chosen to live in town with his sister after the funeral. He didn't fight her. The farmhouse had grown too quiet, too fast, and Caleb didn't have the words to make it feel like home. Some days he found himself forgetting to speak at all. The wind carried with it the faintest scent of rain, but Caleb knew better than to hope. He moved through chores with methodical precision, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, making mental notes of repairs he couldn't afford to make. The barn roof leaked. The tractor needed a new starter. The grain silo's side had begun to rust through. He kept a notebook in his back pocket, filled with numbers that never added up. By late afternoon, the sun had burned away any hint of moisture in the air. Caleb stood at the edge of the property, looking out at the woods beyond the fence line. His land sloped down toward a narrow ravine, where trees thickened and shadows gathered. He rarely ventured that far anymore. Too many memories in those trees. Sarah had loved walking down there in the early mornings, before the world stirred, said the quiet let her think. He remembered the last walk she took before the treatments began. She had come back with a handful of wildflowers and a soft smile. He hadn't understood it at the time. Now he thought maybe she had already made peace with leaving. The thought sat heavy in his chest as he turned back toward the house. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but he had nothing left to do. He'd eat a sandwich he didn't want, sit in a chair by the window, and wait for sleep to take him again. Until something, or someone, broke the silence. The sky began to darken just past 5. Caleb noticed the shift as he stepped onto the porch with a rusted oil can in hand, intending to grease the hinges on the barn door. The air had turned thick, weighted in a way he hadn't felt in months. He looked up and saw clouds tumbling over the hills like bruises across the sky. The wind picked up, sharp and sudden, stirring loose the dust that clung to the dry ground. He moved faster than usual, herding the chickens into their coop and latching the barn before the wind could rip the door wide again. Lightning flashed in the distance, a pale fork against the tree line. Thunder followed, not loud, but low and stretched, like a warning trying to make up its mind. By the time he was crossing back to the house, the first drops had fallen. They landed heavy and slow, darkening his flannel shirt in coin-sized patches. He paused on the porch steps and listened. The storm was coming in sideways, wind and rain beginning to tear through the brittle corn stalks that lined the edge of his field. Then he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind, a high, wavering note that rose and fell in the gusts. But when it came again, clearer, sharper, edged with panic, he dropped the oil can and stood still. It was a scream, faint but real, carried across the field from the woods. His first instinct was to doubt himself. People didn't get lost out here. No one hiked this far into private land unless they were poaching or hopelessly off course. But the scream returned, fractured by wind and distance, and Caleb was already stepping off the porch before he made the decision to go. He cut across the pasture, legs pumping through tall grass and uneven ground. The rain began to fall harder, soaking through his jacket, blurring the trees ahead. Branches whipped and cracked above him as he entered the forest, following the path that hadn't been used since Sarah died. His boots slid in the mud, but he didn't stop. The scream came again, closer now, tight with pain. Near the edge of the ravine, he saw her. She was sprawled among the wet leaves and tangled roots, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, her face streaked with rain and blood. Her backpack was half open beside her, contents scattered and sliding down the slope. She looked up, blinking through the storm. "Please," she said, her voice raw and cracking. "Help me." Caleb didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her, hands already reaching to assess the injury. She winced, but didn't pull away. Her skin was cold, soaked through, and her ankle was swelling fast beneath a torn hiking boot. "I've got you," he said, more to himself than to her. And then, for the first time in years, he lifted something fragile and alive into his arms and carried it home. The house felt too small with someone else inside it. Caleb laid her on the couch with a folded blanket under her injured leg, then stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with his hands. She looked around the room like she was trying to memorize it. Rain beat steady on the roof, and the soft tick of the wall clock filled the space between them. Her name was June. She told him that as he handed her a mug of warm water, the best he could offer while the power flickered. She said it gently, like she wasn't sure he cared. He didn't give his name right away. He sat in the chair across from her and watched as she examined the bandage he had wrapped around her ankle. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Could have hit your head and never woken up." "I did hit my head," she replied, wincing. "Woke up anyway." He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. She explained that she'd been hiking solo, looking for an old trail her brother once wrote about. Her GPS had lost signal near the hills. She thought she could find her way by memory, but the slope had been slick, and her foot had caught on something just before she tumbled. He listened, nodding once, then went to the kitchen. He didn't ask more questions. He heated soup on the old propane stove and brought it to her in a chipped bowl. She accepted it with a quiet thank you and didn't press him to talk. Outside, the storm dragged on into night. Power gave out not long after dinner, leaving them with the hiss of lantern light and the occasional groan of wind through the windows. June rested her head against a cushion, eyes closed, the bowl empty on her lap. Caleb sat nearby, staring into the flickering flame, the quiet making him nervous in a way it hadn't for years. She stirred and opened her eyes. "Are you always this quiet?" she asked. "I've gotten used to it." She studied him for a long moment, then set the bowl on the side table. "Most people would have left me out there," she said. "I'm not most people," he replied. "No, you're not." That hung in the air longer than he liked. He stood and moved toward the linen closet, pulling out an extra blanket and pillow. When he returned, she was watching the window, eyes tracking the rhythm of the rain. "I'll be gone by morning, soon as I can walk," she said. "You're not walking on that leg tomorrow," he told her. "You'll stay until you can." She looked at him, really looked, and something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition, maybe, of loss, of stubbornness, of loneliness that had worn itself into the skin. He handed her the blanket. She took it. In the quiet that followed, neither of them felt quite like strangers anymore. The house had gone still except for the creak of wood settling and the faint rattle of wind pushing against the shutters. Without power, the rooms took on a dim amber glow from the lantern on the coffee table. June lay reclined on the couch, her injured leg propped and blanketed. Caleb sat in the armchair nearby, turning a fire poker slowly in his hands, though there was no fire to tend. "Your daughter," June said softly. "Is that her in the photo?" He followed her gaze to the frame on the shelf. A girl with curly dark hair and bright eyes sat on a porch step, her arm around a golden retriever. Caleb nodded. "Lily. She's 16 now. Lives in town with her aunt." June waited, letting the silence hold its shape a moment longer. Then she asked, "Why not here?" He leaned back, exhaled through his nose. Wasn't much left for her after her mother died. Too quiet. Too hard. June looked down at her hands. "My brother used to say, quiet was the only place he could think clearly, that it scared people because it made them feel everything they'd tried to outrun." Caleb didn't reply right away. The wind let out a long sigh through the trees, and rain tapped a slow rhythm against the windows. "What happened to him?" Caleb asked. "He was a combat photographer," she said. "Came home, but never really came back. Took a solo trip up north a few years ago, disappeared somewhere near this region. They found his camera bag near a waterfall. Nothing else." "I'm sorry." She nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I used to dream he'd show up at my door one day. No explanations. Just a smile. You hang on to things when you don't get to bury them." Caleb leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. The lantern flame danced across the tired lines in his face. "Sarah and I met in high school. She was loud, smart, always moving. I think I fell in love with her because she pulled me out of my own head." His voice thinned. "Cancer came fast. She made it to Lily's 10th birthday. That was her last wish." June pulled the blanket closer, not from cold, but because her chest felt tight. The pain in her ankle was distant now, dulled by something warmer and harder to name. "She must have been brave," she said. "She didn't cry once," Caleb answered. "I did. After." The clock ticked, marking a minute they both felt pass through them. "I didn't think I'd ever talk about her again," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd be found today." He looked at her, really looked, and saw the wear in her face, not just from the fall, but from years of carrying something too heavy alone. "Get some rest," he said gently. "You too." He watched as she settled in, then turned down the lantern until the room was soft with shadow. The storm passed sometime after midnight, but neither of them heard it go. Morning came with a gray stillness. The sky hung low over the hills, and the air was heavy with the scent of wet earth. Caleb stood by the sink, sipping weak coffee, while June shifted on the couch, slowly working her way upright. Her leg was still swollen, but she could stand with help. She didn't ask for it. She used the edge of the coffee table and gritted her teeth until she was on her feet. Her phone had found a signal sometime before dawn. She'd sent a message to a friend in the nearby town. The reply had come quickly. They were on their way. She moved carefully around the living room, picking up her things, folding the blanket, setting the borrowed mug by the sink. Caleb watched her, uncertain whether to say something or let her go in silence. "I meant what I said," she told him as she pulled her jacket over her shoulders. "You saved my life." He didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the long stretch of road that led out past the fence. "I didn't do anything most people wouldn't do." "You did," she said quietly. "And I won't forget it." A car pulled up, tires crunching gravel. A woman stepped out and waved. June picked up her backpack and limped to the door. Before stepping out, she turned to look at him. "I'd like to come back," she said. "Soon, if that's all right." He held her gaze and gave the smallest nod, all right. She left with a soft smile and a quiet thank you. The door shut behind her, and the house felt emptier than it had before. He stood in the silence for a long time, staring at the chair she had left unoccupied. The house settled into silence once she was gone. Caleb moved through it like he always had, sweeping the porch, feeding the animals, walking the fence line, but every task felt slower, like his hands had forgotten what purpose they served. The rain had passed, leaving puddles in the low places of the field, and the air held a clean scent he hadn't noticed in a long while. He didn't expect her to come back. People said things in the quiet after storms, when gratitude still hung heavy. That didn't mean they followed through. He told himself it was better that way. Still, he paused by the couch more often than he meant to, letting his fingers rest on the cushion where her head had lain. He rinsed the mug she had used and put it back in the cabinet with the others. He didn't touch the blanket. 2 days later, he walked into the guest room. It had been untouched since Sarah's mother visited years ago. Dust clung to the window panes, and the bed was still covered in a quilt Sarah had sewn long before the sickness. Caleb stood in the doorway for a long moment before he opened the windows and let the light in. He stripped the bed, washed the sheets, swept the floor, and opened the closet. He didn't know why. At dinner, he found himself setting a second plate, catching the mistake, just as he reached for a second fork. He stared at the table, then sat down with just his own portion and ate in silence. The house didn't creak the way it had when she was here. The shadows stayed where they were supposed to, and the quiet, once so familiar, felt like it was watching him now. It was nearly dusk when he saw the dust trail rising from the road. Caleb stood by the barn, sleeves rolled and hands smeared with oil from the tractor's engine. He squinted into the low sun as a silver sedan came slowly up the gravel drive. For a moment, he thought it was someone lost, or maybe a delivery gone wrong, but then the door opened and June stepped out. She moved carefully, still favoring her left leg but walking without help. She wore jeans and a canvas jacket, her hair tied back. The look in her eyes wasn't the same as when she had left. It held a quiet purpose, something that made his pulse rise without understanding why. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would," she answered. They stood facing each other in the settling light. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of hay and pine. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, unsure what to do with them once clean. "I need to talk to you," June said. "Can we go inside?" He nodded, leading her back into the house. She glanced around the living room as she stepped in, eyes catching on the cleaned guest room door left slightly ajar. He offered her a seat, and she took it slowly, her fingers clasped tight in her lap. "It's about Lily," she said. Caleb tensed. "What about her?" June reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "While I was in the hospital, there was a girl volunteering. Sweet, smart, asked if I needed anything. Said her name was Lily. I didn't think much of it until she mentioned this farm. Your name." Caleb leaned forward, brows drawn. "She never told me she was volunteering. She said she didn't think you'd care, that you wouldn't come see her even if she asked." June unfolded the paper and slid it across the table. "She wrote this down, for you." Caleb picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakable, Lily's tight, looping scrawl. He read the note slowly, once, then again. She missed the porch, she missed her mother's garden, she was scared he didn't want her back. Caleb set the note down carefully, as if it might vanish if he moved too fast. "She's in town," June said. "At my friend's place. She asked me to come here first. Said she didn't want to show up unless she knew she was welcome." His throat felt tight. He hadn't known how much he missed her until the thought of seeing her again landed in his chest like a weight. "She's always welcome," he said. June smiled, soft and sure. "Then, let's go get her." The silence in the house didn't feel as heavy anymore. Something had shifted, the way wind does before a rain. For the first time in years, Caleb reached for his keys and didn't hesitate at the door. They found Lily sitting on the front steps of a modest yellow house near the edge of town. She stood as they pulled up, brushing her hands nervously against her jeans. Her hair was longer than he remembered, pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she looked older somehow, like life had been moving faster for her than it had for him. Caleb stepped out of the truck and froze for a moment, unsure if she would come to him. But she did. Slowly at first, then faster, until she was in his arms and he was holding her like he might lose her again. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and rough. "I should have come." "I didn't ask," she replied. "I didn't know how." They stood there until the tension slipped from their shoulders, replaced by something quieter. Forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. It had been waiting between them for too long already. Back at the farm, Lily wandered through the house like someone waking up from a long dream. She ran her fingers over the photo frames, peeked into the guest room, stepped onto the back porch, and stood for a long time looking out at the garden. Caleb stayed near but gave her space, watching her movements with a quiet ache. June helped prepare dinner. She moved easily through the kitchen now, familiar with the cabinets, knowing where the knives and salt were kept. Lily sat at the table, offering to chop vegetables, her voice soft but open. They ate together with the windows open and the last of the evening light pouring in. The conversation was careful at first, but laughter crept in like it had always been there, waiting for permission. Later, as Lily settled into her old room, Caleb stood at the doorway and watched her place a book on the nightstand. "Do you think Mom would have been okay with this?" she asked. He nodded. "She would have been the one who brought you home." When he stepped back into the living room, June was there waiting. "She belongs here," June said. "So do you," Caleb answered. And this time, neither of them looked away. The days that followed were filled with the kind of quiet work that didn't need much talking. June stayed longer than she'd planned, and no one mentioned a departure. She helped mend a section of fence, her limp nearly gone, and learned how to move through the barn without scaring the cattle. Caleb watched her without making it obvious, noting how she smiled when she thought no one was looking, how she leaned into the wind when she stood on the porch in the morning. Lily took to her quickly. They talked easily, the way people do when they recognize something familiar in each other. Some afternoons, the two of them would sit under the old sycamore and trade stories, laughter spilling out across the yard like music from a long-forgotten song. One evening, while Lily was inside washing dishes, June found Caleb in the garden, kneeling in the dirt beside a row of struggling green beans. The soil was finally starting to turn dark again, and something small had begun to grow where Sarah's roses once bloomed. June crouched beside him, brushing soil from her palms. "You never gave up on it," she said. "It's just land," he replied. "It's not." They sat there as the light faded and the sky turned a shade of blue that pressed close to the earth. Caleb turned to her, his eyes steady. "You make it easier," he said. She met his gaze and didn't flinch. "So do you." He reached out, not suddenly, but like he'd been waiting for the right moment, and when their hands met, it felt like something had settled in place. June leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, the air between them warm and still. When they kissed, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was quiet and certain, like two people who had already lost enough and knew better than to take anything for granted. That night, as the stars rose over the fields, Caleb stood at the window with June asleep on the couch behind him. He looked out at the land he had nearly stopped believing in and knew, without question, that something new had finally taken root. June stood at the edge of the porch, holding her phone in both hands, staring at the message on the screen. The offer was real. A field research position with a local conservation group based just an hour away. It was part-time to start, but it came with a small stipend and a place to live closer to town. Her name had come up after someone forwarded her hospital story to the organization. They wanted someone who knew the land, someone who had walked it, lived through it. Caleb watched her from the yard where he was spreading feed for the chickens. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way she chewed the inside of her cheek. She hadn't told him yet, but he knew. He had seen it before, in Sarah's posture before hard decisions, in Lily's eyes before she left. June looked up, caught his gaze, and came down the steps. She walked with care, her legs still favoring softer ground. "I got an offer," she said, once she stood in front of him. "I figured," he replied. "It's good work, meaningful. I'd have my own place." He nodded. The air between them was quiet, but not cold. She waited, unsure of what he wanted her to say. She knew better than to ask him to ask her to stay. "I want you to take it," he said, "if it's what you need." June looked down, then back up. "I don't need saving." "I know, but I want to stay, if it's not just about the land, if it's about more than what I can help fix." Caleb stepped closer. "I want you here because you belong here, not because I need help, not because of the farm, because when you're here, it feels like home again." June smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and lingered. "Then I guess I'll need a pair of real boots." He leaned in and kissed her gently, and neither of them felt the need to say anything else. By the end of the week, she had turned down the apartment and accepted the job on the condition she could do most of the work from the farm. Some roots grow deeper when they're given the space to choose. The sun crested over the ridge in a pale sweep of gold, casting long shadows across the field. Caleb knelt beside Lily in the garden, both of them tugging weeds from between rows of new growth. The soil was darker now, soft beneath their fingers, carrying the scent of rain and turned earth. Green shoots pushed upward with quiet determination, claiming life where there had once been nothing but dust. June stood by the fence, sipping from a chipped enamel mug, her boots caked with dried mud. She watched them for a moment, then made her way over, crouching beside them and reaching for the trowel. "Tomatoes are coming in strong," she said. "They always were your favorite," Caleb replied, brushing a curl from Lily's forehead. Lily smiled. "They're Mom's favorite, too." No one looked away. The memory had settled into something softer, something they could all carry together. A breeze moved through the fields, lifting the ends of June's jacket and stirring the tall grass along the edges. Chickens clucked nearby, and Brisket barked lazily from the porch. The house behind them stood quiet and full, every window cracked open to let the morning in. They worked like that for a while, hands in the dirt, shoulders brushing now and then. No one hurried. No one needed to. There was time now, time to plant, to wait, to grow. When they finally stood and looked back over the land, Caleb felt it. The change was not loud or sharp, but it was real. Not everything that dies stays gone. Not everything buried stays under. Some things rise again, stronger for the storm that tried to keep them down. And some hearts, given light and patience, remember how to bloom.